Greetings and welcome to the Astronomy Picture of the Day podcast. Today's picture for March 7th of 2025 is titled Planetary Nebula, Abell 7. So what do we see here? Well, this is an example of a planetary nebula. Now, a planetary nebula, despite its name, has nothing to do with planets. It is actually the end of the life of a star, much like our own sun. And that this is what will happen to our sun in 5 or 6 billion years when it reaches the end of its life. Now what happens to the star is that it uses up its hydrogen. It has hydrogen in the core, which the sun, for example, is currently fusing into helium. Now it will eventually run out of that fuel. And right now it's at about 50-50. It's got about half hydrogen and half helium. The sun's about halfway through its life. But as it begins to use up that hydrogen billions of years from now, then it will start to contract its core. And as the core contracts down because there is a lack of energy to support it, the outer layers will expand out into space, and that will make our star a red giant star. And eventually, as it gets larger and larger and goes through various different stages that I'm not going to go through here, it will eventually expel those outer layers out into space. So this is a very calm process where those outer layers are expelled outward. It is not a violent event such as a supernova explosion where things are thrown out very quickly. This takes a lot of time, and eventually those outer layers just are not held well enough by the gravity of the collapsing star that they are released out into space and will continue to expand. And in this case, the nebula is estimated to be about 20,000 years old. And that's typical of the lifespan of a planetary nebula. They will last tens of thousands to maybe 100,000 years before they finally dissipate out into space. Those layers continue to expand. They will continue moving outward away from the central star, the core left behind, and eventually become dispersed out into space. Now right now they're being illuminated. They are glowing because of the energy of the star at the core. So they are no longer giving off any kind of energy of their own. But that star is now a white dwarf star, very hot object, giving off lots of ultraviolet light. And that ultraviolet light will then ionize and excite the atoms that are now in this outer layer in the planetary nebula itself, and will cause them to glow. Now eventually the white dwarf will cool off and the atoms will move farther and farther away, and eventually it will just dissipate out and will just become part of the ordinary interstellar medium as it expands out, eventually becoming seed material for future generations of stars. So this is something like what our sun will do in another 6 billion years or so, as it exhausts the hydrogen in its core and expands, eventually expelling those outer layers into space. So at that time, some distant astronomer in our galaxy may be able to look back at the location where our sun used to be and see an object such as the one we see today in the planetary nebula known as Abell 7. So that was our picture of the day for March 7th of 2025. It was titled Planetary Nebula, Abell 7. We'll be back again tomorrow for the next picture. So until then, have a great day, everyone, and I will see you in class.